A few days ago, I watched a news report on TV about a case where infant bones were being sold in the city, and the perpetrators were fined over 300,000 yuan. I was disgusted, as I never imagined that infant bones could be so valuable. Out of curiosity, I searched online and discovered that eagle bones are considered the finest among all animal and human bones, especially the skulls of infants. The news report mentioned that these infant skulls were sold overseas, where they were polished, reinforced, and processed through various stages to become translucent and exquisitely delicate. These polished infant skulls were then mounted onto scepters, which were believed to protect the owner and alter their fortune. These scepters are highly sought after in some foreign markets, with demand exceeding supply. Now, some regions in China have also begun researching this. Such infant bone theft cases have appeared in many places across the country. In fact, the reason I became so interested in this news is because of my grandfather. My name is William Liu, and my grandfather's name is Lucas Liu. Even though he was blind, in my eyes, he was truly an extraordinary person. My grandfather was a bone reader, highly skilled at feeling bones and reading fate. Although human bones may seem similar, when grandfather touches them, they are vastly different. Grandfather often says, faces have facial features, bones have bone features. Facial features can be changed by plastic surgery, but bone features are predestined and can predict a person's ups and downs, as well as their fortune. Hearing this, I was deeply intrigued and wanted to learn bone reading from grandfather, but grandfather said that since I was not blind, the heavens would not grant me this skill. So, I only learned a little and had no opportunity to study it in depth. There is something else that very few people know. Grandfather could not only read the bones of the living, but he could also read the bones of the dead, commonly known as ghost bone reading. Ghost bone reading is naturally more profound, and I've only heard about it without understanding its true meaning. Years ago, grandfather took me away from our old home in Qipan and moved to Mist Town where he opened a massage parlor. The massage business was mediocre, but many people came specifically to have grandfather read their bones and predict their fate. Unfortunately, grandfather passed away from illness 6 months ago, and I inherited his massage parlor to make a living. I only learned a half-baked massage technique from grandfather, so the business was barely surviving. I never expected that my life's trajectory would completely change one night after watching that news report. That night happened to be the 15th day of the lunar calendar. I never thought that the course of my life would completely change on a night after watching that news report. That night happened to be the full moon of the lunar calendar, but a thick layer of fog covered the moon. Looking out the window, everything was gloomy and eerie. I was about to close the shop when suddenly someone barged in from outside, startling me. I realized the person was Thomas Kong. When grandfather was alive, he often came to see grandfather, but since grandfather passed away, he had never come back. I heard he used to be a grave robber, and I had only met him a few times and had no interaction with him. Thomas Kong is over 50 years old now, and when he entered the shop, his face was pale, covered in sweat, and his lips were trembling with no color left. He was carrying a bundle on his back and trembling all over. I was puzzled and asked, "Uncle Tan, what's wrong?" Thomas Kong turned around, closed the door, bolted it, and then whispered, "William Liu, did you learn anything from grandfather? Do you know how to read ghost bones?" I stepped back and shook my head in confusion. Thomas Kong looked disappointed and sighed. I asked again, "Uncle Tan, what exactly happened?" Out of respect, I called him uncle. Thomas Kong waved his hand, "William Liu, can you help me with something? I'm in a hurry. I'll leave this bundle with you. Someone will come to pick it up tomorrow. This money is for you, consider it a storage fee." As Thomas Kong said this, he handed me a stack of bills. Judging by its thickness, it must have been 800 to 1,000 yuan. With Thomas Kang's request, I naturally couldn't refuse. After all, he had some ties with grandfather in the past. Besides, he gave me money, which was crucial for me, as I was financially struggling. I tried to refuse twice, but seeing Thomas Kong so insistent, I accepted the money. I pointed to the corner of the room and said, "Just leave it there." Thomas Kong put the bundle down, and just as he was about to leave, he suddenly turned around and said, "William Liu, whatever you do, don't open that bundle." I felt both annoyed and amused, not believing he didn't trust me, so I replied irritably, "If you don't trust me, just take it with you." Thomas Kong hesitated, looked at the bundle one last time, and finally left the massage shop. I locked the door and went back to bed. To me, what had just happened was insignificant, and I didn't think much of it. However, after some time, while lying in bed, I began to hear a faint sound. At first, I didn't pay attention to it, but the sound persisted. In the stillness of the night, the noise became more and more distinct, forcing me to get up and step out of my room. At that moment, I noticed a faint flickering light coming from the front room of the massage parlor. Reflecting back, the front room of the parlor was where the massages took place, while the back room was for resting. I was the only one renting the entire place, so why was there a sound coming from the front room? Could it be that a thief had entered? I quietly tiptoed towards the front room and peeked in. I saw that the front room was completely dark, but the TV was on. There was no program, only static snow on the screen, and a hissing sound. I immediately felt relieved, realizing the light was coming from there. But I distinctly remembered that I hadn't turned on the TV. Could it have broken down? I wasn't sure if it was because of the cool night air, but as I walked into the front room, I felt the temperature was much lower than usual, almost as if the air conditioning was on. I went over, gently turned off the TV, and the room was plunged back into darkness. I shook my head and turned to head back to my room. Just as I turned around, I heard a faint rustling sound in my ear. It sounded like someone was rummaging through something, very faint. My hair stood on end, and a chill ran from the soles of my feet up to the top of my head, because it seemed like the sound was coming from the corner of the room. I realized that the bundle in the corner was the one Thomas Kong left behind. I recalled his complex expression before leaving, along with his warning not to open the bundle. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming curiosity about the bundle. I reached for the light switch, pressed it twice, but nothing happened. It's common in our town for the power to go out at night, and tonight was no exception. However, a bigger question immediately popped into my head: without electricity, how did the TV turn on earlier? Could it have been just a coincidence that the power went out after that brief moment? At that moment, the rustling sound continued. Left with no choice, I fumbled in the drawer for a flashlight and, using the faint moonlight from outside, stepped closer to the bundle in the corner. The bundle was now a mystery stuck in my throat, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep without unraveling it. As the flashlight beam hit the bundle, I noticed it was slightly moving. Clearly, there was something alive inside. Perhaps it was a kitten or a puppy, I guessed randomly. The room was quiet, and apart from the rustling sound coming from the bundle, the only other sound I could hear was my own heavy breathing. As I approached, the bundle seemed to sense something. By the time I reached it, the slight movement on the bundle had stopped. I swallowed nervously, wiped the sweat from my palms on my clothes. One hand holding the flashlight, the other trembling as it reached for the zipper of the bundle. I had no idea why such an ordinary bundle was making me so tense. I held my breath, my heart racing as I unzipped it halfway. To my surprise, something suddenly peeked out from the half-open zipper. It was a pale, white arm, swollen as if soaked in something, disturbingly white. On its skin were a few crawling maggots, which looked especially disgusting under the dim light of the flashlight. I didn't care about the disgust though. The sight of the arm made me scream and fall to the ground. The flashlight nearly slipped from my hand. The small arm was clearly a baby's arm. Could it be that inside the bundle was a baby? The arm hung lifelessly, devoid of any vitality. How could this be? Seeing that the arm didn't move any further, I slowly calmed down. Could there really be a baby's corpse inside? Could this have something to do with those infant corpse theft cases? If it's a corpse, then how do we explain the rustling sound from earlier? In the end, I decided to get to the bottom of this. If it's a baby's corpse, I'll report it to the police first thing in the morning. That Thomas Kong is so vile, using my place as a trading spot. No wonder he gave me money, it's to keep me quiet. I mustered up the courage and moved closer to the bundle. The bundle was already half open. A foul, indescribable stench hit me, making me nauseous. I decided to unzip it completely. The bundle was now fully open, and I shone the flashlight inside. Even though I had prepared myself, what I saw still shocked me. Inside was indeed a baby's body, completely naked. The baby's skin was pale as blood, an unhealthy white. The baby's features were all scrunched together, making the small face even harder to distinguish. The baby's entire body was crawling with white maggots, some even crawling in and out of its nose and mouth. I forced myself to hold back the nausea and noticed a silver needle stuck in the center of the baby's forehead. The needle was slightly bigger than the ones we use for sewing, and it trembled slightly as it stuck out of the baby's forehead. How strange, why would there be a silver needle? Instinctively, I reached out with my left hand and grabbed the needle. Just at that moment, the baby's tightly shut eyes suddenly opened. The baby's eyes were different from normal eyes, there were no whites, just two black orbs set in the eye sockets. I wasn't prepared for this at all, and my body instinctively leaned back in fear. My hand, holding the needle, didn't have time to let go. As I leaned back, I ended up pulling the needle out. At that moment, I distinctly heard a soft sigh coming from behind me. But the sound was so clear. I turned my head quickly to look, but behind me was nothing but darkness. Only the faint moonlight from the window filtered in, and there was no one in sight. I thought I might be hallucinating. But then I suddenly felt my wrist, the one holding the needle, tighten. At the same time, a sharp pain coursed through me. I turned around again, horrified, to find that the baby's corpse, which had been in the bundle, had somehow crawled out. The baby was using its tiny hand to grip my hand tightly. Despite its small hand, the strength was immense, it felt like a steel clamp was holding my hand, and the pain was excruciating. Even more terrifying was the fact that the baby's blurry face was now twisted into a smile. It was smiling at me. Yes, the corners of its mouth were slowly curving upwards. Its mouth began to open wider and wider, until the corners of its mouth split all the way up to its ears. Oh my God! I instinctively swung my arm, smashing the flashlight in my other hand towards the baby. With a thud, the flashlight hit the baby's arm. The decaying flesh on the baby's arm peeled off from the impact, with two chunks falling to the ground, along with the maggots that had been wriggling on the flesh. The baby's arm revealed its white, skeletal bone, thin and glistening under the flashlight's beam. Even though the flesh had fallen off, the baby's grip on me didn't loosen at all, and the pain only intensified. Damn it, get off! I shouted, swinging my arm harder, trying to shake it off. The baby, clinging to my wrist, was flung into the air and finally let go. It slammed into the wall with a heavy thud. My arm, where it had been gripping, was nearly numb, and the flashlight beam followed the baby as it landed on the floor. More chunks of its flesh fell off, but its appearance didn't change, it still grinned at me with its black eyes fixed on mine. That smile sent chills down my spine, and I couldn't help but back away until I hit the wall, with nowhere else to go. I could hear my own heartbeat, my body trembling uncontrollably, and cold sweat soaking my clothes. What the hell is this thing? I glanced at the door, thinking I should just run. There's no way I could stay in this house. That I kept my eyes on the baby, inching my way toward the door. The baby stared at me with its black eyes. Just as I made a move, the baby suddenly let out two sharp, eerie cries, but it still wore that same sinister smile. The sound was like a bird's call, but it was sharp and screeching, almost like the noise of metal scraping against metal. It made my skin crawl. The baby stood up, wobbling as it took a step forward. But as soon as it lifted one leg, its body swayed and fell to the ground again. After that, it tried repeatedly, like a toddler learning to walk, constantly stumbling and falling. It seemed like it hadn't yet learned how to walk. I watched the scene, not daring to hesitate. While it was distracted, I edged closer to the door. The door had 2 layers, the inner one was a regular door, and the outer one was a rolling shutter that I had installed for security. At night, I usually locked the inner door. When I reached the door, I remembered, damn it, the key to the shutter was in the bedroom. My mind buzzed with panic. This was bad, there was no way to run now. At that moment, the baby stopped trying to walk and began crawling. Its crawling speed was shockingly fast, and in just a few seconds, it was right in front of me. I locked eyes with the baby for about 10 seconds, staring into its black pupils and decaying body. My willpower was on the verge of collapsing. Then suddenly, it let out 2 more bizarre laughs. And to my shock, 2 similar cries echoed from outside. It was as if the baby had been summoned. Suddenly, it jumped up and dodged me. I didn't expect that such a small body could have such strong jumping power. It started furiously banging against the rolling shutter door, as if trying to get out. Once, twice, the sound of the impact was loud, and I didn't dare stop it. With each bang, the previously sturdy shutter began to dent. The baby seemed like it was on some kind of stimulant, completely oblivious to itself as rotten flesh and filthy blood kept falling from its body. It relentlessly attacked the shutter, with the loud banging sound likely echoing far. But now, I was actually hoping it would attract someone, preferably the police. When I saw that the baby was no longer paying attention to me, I crouched in a corner, too scared to make a sound. Finally, the baby managed to punch a hole in the shutter and crawled right through. I sat there, nearly collapsing, waiting a while with no further noises. Summoning all my courage, I quietly stood up and tiptoed over to take a look through the hole. Outside, it was still pitch black, and the fog hadn't lifted. The baby had long disappeared. I let out a sigh of relief, wiping the cold sweat from my forehead, and turned back, shining the flashlight around the room. The room was a mess, mostly littered with chunks of rotten flesh and foul blood left by the baby. I frowned, my head throbbing painfully. What the hell was going on? I suddenly remembered hearing a soft sigh from behind me when I pulled the silver needle out of the baby's forehead, but when I turned around, there was nothing. Who made that sound? And who turned on the TV? I also heard similar baby-like cries from outside, but what were they? There were too many strange things happening tonight. Exhausted by the baby's torment, I didn't bother with the mess on the floor and ran straight to the bedroom, locking the door tightly. I didn't know if the baby would return, so I grabbed a kitchen knife from the kitchen and kept it by my side. Even though I knew the knife wouldn't be of much use, it was enough to give me some courage. I wrapped myself in the blanket, my head feeling like it was about to explode. I don't know how long had passed before I heard another sigh. It wasn't loud, but it sounded like someone sighing right beside me. I jerked awake, my eyes snapping open. The room was pitch black, but outside, a dim streetlight cast a faint glow. And in that dim light, I could see the shadow of someone standing at my door. Who? I shouted. I heard my own voice breaking. Instinctively, I reached for the kitchen knife by the bed, but lost my balance and fell to the floor. When I got up again, I saw that shadow still standing right there by the door, like a shadow cast on the doorway. But how could there be a shadow if there was no light in the room? Anger surged within me, and I hurled the kitchen knife in my hand. The knife flew through the air toward the door, but surprisingly, it passed right through the shadow and fell outside with a clang. Yet the shadow moved towards me. Don't come closer. I screamed in desperation. To my shock, when the shadow reached the doorway, it suddenly jerked back as if electrocuted, then vanished into thin air right in front of my eyes. I shook my heavy head, certain I wasn't imagining things. I hadn't seen it wrong. I pressed the light switch, but the power was still out. Now it was clear, besides me, there had to be something else in this house. That thought chilled me to the bone. I clenched my fists, not knowing what to do. Just then, I heard a rooster crowing outside the window. Morning had come. I sat down on the bed, thinking that perhaps the shadow hadn't disappeared because it feared my knife, but because daylight had arrived. From what I understood, if it feared the day, then it must be a ghost. Would it come back again tonight? It seemed like it hadn't tried to harm me yet, but having a ghost in my house for no reason, along with a mysterious dead baby, all of this started with the bundle Thomas Kong brought. Thinking about it made me furious. I leaned back against the bed, waiting until daylight came. As the sun rose, I felt my courage returning. I went to the front room and noticed that the dirty blood from the dead baby on the floor had dried and turned brown. The rotten flesh had also dried up and wasn't as disgusting as before. I quickly swept the mess with a broom, planning to report the incident to the police. Maybe they'd take it seriously and station someone here to watch over the place, which would make me feel less scared. The rolling shutter had a hole punched by the baby and could only open halfway now. I ducked and slipped outside. The sunlight was glaringly bright. As the sunlight hit my wrist, I suddenly felt a sharp pain. I looked down and noticed that the spot where the dead baby had scratched me was swollen and red, as if I were wearing a bracelet. Under the sunlight, my swollen skin became semi-transparent, and beneath it, a faint black line could be seen. After the night of terror, I hadn't even noticed my hand. Seeing it now, I was shocked. I tried moving my hand, but my entire palm was numb, only my arm still hurt. It looked like I had been seriously injured, possibly even damaging the bone. I gave up on going to the police and headed straight for Mist Town Hospital. Of course, I didn't dare tell the doctor that I was scratched by a dead baby. He wouldn't believe me, and might even send me to the psych ward. I just said I accidentally slammed it in the door. Even I found it hard to believe, but that fool of a doctor bought it and gave me a bunch of medicine, both oral and topical. I left the hospital feeling hopeless. I knew the medicine wouldn't help, because the pain in my wrist was even worse now. Especially in the sunlight, it felt like thousands of insects were gnawing at it, itching and hurting at the same time. I pulled down my sleeve to shield it from the sun, and that provided some relief. I walked out of the hospital gate, deciding to head back home. Didn't Thomas Kong say someone would come to collect the bundle? I reached the street where my massage parlor was, and immediately spotted someone sneaking around in front of my shop, looking suspiciously in all directions. With just a glance, I recognized him, Thomas Kong. Seeing him filled me with rage. I ran up to him, grabbed him by the collar, and punched him in the face with my right hand. The old man yelped, his face blooming red like a flower, and blood started flowing from his nose. Seeing him like that didn't calm me at all. I shouted, "You bastard! What did you bring yesterday? It nearly killed me." Thomas Kong clutched his nose, raising his hand to stop me as I approached. By now, a few locals had noticed the commotion and were starting to gather around. I knew from experience that within minutes, the place would be crowded with onlookers. In this day and age, people love a spectacle. Thomas Kong forced a pained smile, "William Liu, let's talk inside." Not wanting to cause unnecessary trouble, I grabbed Thomas Kong and dragged him inside the massage parlor, shutting the door behind us. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, taking a step toward the bundle. Thomas Kong clutched his nose and trembled. "I'll tell you, just don't hit me again. No more nonsense, I nearly died because of you. One punch is letting you off easy. What's in the bundle?" Thomas Kong looked at the open bundle, stunned. The dead child ran off. I replied angrily, "It ran." Thomas Kang's face twitched. Suddenly, he bent down, picked up the silver needle, and his hands started shaking. You pulled out the soul-calming needle. Soul-calming needle. So what if I pulled it out? Thomas Kong collapsed to the floor, mumbling to himself incessantly. It's over, it's really over. I told you not to touch it. Nonsense. It moved on its own. I didn't even know what it was, just opened it out of curiosity. What? You mean it moved on its own? Thomas Kong looked completely incredulous. Of course, otherwise, I wouldn't have bothered with your junk. Impossible. Impossible. It was sealed with the soul-calming needle. It's true. It moved on its own. Thomas Kong bent down and started rummaging through the bag. Where did this thing come from? I pressed. I bought it for 50,000 yuan. There's someone collecting infant bones. A set of bones costs 50,000 yuan, and if it's a good skull, 150,000 yuan. As I suspected, Thomas Kong wanted to trade in infant bones. At this point, I still didn't understand how the corpse could have come back to life. Thomas Kong glanced at me, saw no reaction, and continued, You know, I've been in this business. When I heard infant bones could be sold for so much money, I was tempted. I snorted coldly, Get to the point, where did you dig this thing up? 15 miles outside the south gate, in the Hak Bitch Mountains. There's an old cemetery there, mostly for infants. In our circles, we call it the Tomb of Yin Bones. I was stunned, all infants. Where did so many dead children come from? Why wouldn't there be? This Yin Bone Cemetery has been around for at least decades. You don't pay attention, so you don't know. Decades ago, many families were too poor to feed themselves, and many children died young, so they were all buried there. Also, in the past, the preference for boys over girls was severe. Many newborn girls were abandoned or, worse, killed and buried, with their deaths blamed on natural causes. I nodded, agreeing, what you're saying is true. In this backward region, the preference for boys over girls used to be very serious. Many families sold their daughters or gave them away. Some were even cruel enough to kill them outright. Thomas Kong continued, and in recent years, it's gotten worse. Many unmarried and even underage girls have gotten pregnant, and after giving birth, they buried the babies there. The Yin Bone Cemetery is famous in our circles, everyone knows it. It's said that a powerful sorcerer performed rituals there, so if a baby's corpse is buried there, its soul can be reincarnated sooner. As a result, the Yin energy there has grown stronger. Hearing this made me even angrier. Damn it, if you wanted to dig up graves, fine, but why drag me into this? Suddenly, Thomas Kang's face changed, filled with horror, which startled me. Something serious must have happened. Keep in mind, Thomas Kong had been robbing graves for half his life, he'd seen plenty of strange things. What could scare him like this? He steadied himself and continued, the buyers said that if they found infant corpses that were unusual, they'd pay double. I've been in this business long enough to know that these unusual infants are usually royal children, filled with immense resentment. If that resentment isn't resolved, it grows stronger, and the soul eventually becomes a vengeful spirit. Only a master who places a soul-calming needle in the head can seal the spirit inside the infant. I asked, who placed the soul-calming needle? What does the buyer want with these infant corpses? Thomas Kong shook his head blankly, I don't know. I really don't know. My partner and I had only dug up 2 graves when we found the infant corpse with the silver needle in it. It was definitely not normal. But by then, their bodies were already swollen and rotting beyond recognition. For the money, I still dug up the bodies, intending to sell them. I spat angrily, you beast. Heartless. You've lost all sense of morality. Thomas Kong lowered his head and continued, I know, doing this kind of work isn't easy. After we dug up a few infant bones and that body, my partners and I were ready to head back. But on the way, we kept feeling like someone was following us. When we looked back, we didn't see anyone. We were terrified, so we ran as fast as we could, and then we heard two horrible screams from behind. Thomas Kong slowed his speech, and the light from the window fell across his face, making it flicker between shades of red and pale. His eyebrows twitched, and his lips and arms trembled. Seeing him so tense, I poured him a glass of water. He took it, but his hands were shaking so much that the water spilled onto the floor. "They're all dead." When I turned back, I realized my two companions weren't behind me anymore. I mustered up the courage to go back, and there they were, lying on the ground. One of them had all his skin peeled off, leaving just an empty shell. His lower body had been ripped apart, leaving only a bloody hole. Even though it was broad daylight, hearing this made me shudder with cold chills running down my spine. How could anyone strike so quickly in such a short time? I asked. "So, how did you survive? If it was the ghost seeking revenge, why didn't it come after you?" Thomas Kong shook his head. "I don't know, maybe because I ran ahead. Or maybe it's because I was carrying this." He pointed to the bundle beside him. "I remember your grandfather was very skilled in reading bones and calming spirits. He could help souls find peace. I came here hoping you'd help calm the spirit of that child. But I was so scared of being haunted, so I left the bundle here with you." "You bastard." I was furious and punched Thomas Kong again, causing his nose to start bleeding once more. But this time, he didn't cry out in pain or try to dodge. Instead, he continued, "That child had a soul-calming needle inserted. If you hadn't touched it, nothing would have happened. I was planning to bring the buyer here the next day to take it. Damn you. People have died, and you're still thinking about making money?" I cursed. Thomas Kong blushed with embarrassment and asked, "William Liu, what exactly happened last night? Tell me everything in detail." I nodded and briefly recounted the events of the previous night. "Shit, you got injured." "Where?" Thomas Kong asked urgently. "It's all because of that corpse." I pulled up my sleeve, revealing the wound on my wrist. The swelling had worsened, and the black line inside was now more prominent. My hand had turned pale, devoid of any blood. "You're doomed. That's corpse poison," Thomas Kong shouted. "Corpse poison?" I was shocked. "I've seen this before. The corpse poison has invaded your bloodstream. Do you see that black line? It's sucking your blood every day. Eventually, it will spread throughout your entire body. When the black line covers you completely, your skin will start to crack, and the death will be agonizing." "Shit. It's that serious? You must know how to cure it, tell me now." I grabbed Thomas Kong by the collar, shouting. Wait, don't rush." Thomas Kong gasped for air. "God damn it, I'm on the brink of death. How can I not rush?" I loosened my grip a bit. Thomas Kong took a deep breath and said, "Luckily, the black line is still confined to the area around the wound and hasn't spread. You need to immediately cook some sticky rice, but it has to be half-cooked, and apply it to the wound. I also have a protective charm. Burn it, mix the ashes with water, and drink it. If you're lucky, you'll be fine." God damn it, so everything depends on luck in the end? I cursed. Thomas Kong gave a bitter smile. "That's all I can do. And another thing, you need to burn the rotten flesh and blood left by the dead child, bury it deep in the ground, and sprinkle it with incense ash." In my mind, I cursed Thomas Kong and all his ancestors, but I had no other choice but to follow his instructions. The entire day, I was busy doing what he had told me. Thomas Kong stayed and helped, probably out of guilt. To my surprise, when I applied the half-cooked sticky rice to the wound, the cooling sensation relieved much of the pain and itching. As night fell, I felt a heavy sense of dread. Both Thomas Kong and I looked out the window and asked simultaneously, "Do you think that child will come back?" We both shook our heads at the same time. Thomas Kong said, "You mentioned a shadow appeared in your house at night, right? Maybe the child had an accomplice." "That's right, the TV turned on by itself last night. I also saw a shadow and heard a sigh, along with some strange noises outside the window. I'm sure I didn't imagine it." Thomas Kong pondered. That child had the soul calming needle, so the resentment in its body would constantly fight against it. As a result, the resentment grew stronger. But no matter what, the child wouldn't have been able to break the seal on its own. Unless someone helped it? I asked. Exactly. The shadow in your house must have been helping the child. But its power wasn't strong enough to break the seal completely, only to stir the child slightly. That's why you ended up pulling the soul-calming needle out. Shit, that makes sense. I nodded. But I still don't understand why they didn't kill me. The child only scratched me once. Maybe you're just lucky. I doubt it's that simple. Thomas Kong shook his head and gave a bitter smile. Right now I can barely take care of myself. Who knows if that dead child that ran away might come after me for revenge. No, I have to leave this place. Don't go. I quickly stopped him. Stay here with me, keep me company. I'm scared to be alone. Liu Que, it's not that I don't want to help you, but I'm a walking disaster right now. Of the three of us who went, only I survived. I can feel it, they're coming after me. If I stay here, it will only attract the vengeful spirits. For your own good, it's best if I leave. I didn't know who Thomas Kong meant by they, but after thinking about it, I realized he was right, so I didn't stop him. As for the corpse poison on your wrist, you have to change the sticky rice 3 times a day until the black energy disappears. If by tomorrow the poison hasn't been controlled, go to Jinjuan Mountain and find a man named He Dao Ren. He once helped me treat corpse poison. Thomas Kong reminded me once again, then picked up the empty bundle and prepared to leave the massage parlor. Take care, Uncle Tan. Seeing his haggard expression, I couldn't help but feel pity, so I called after him. Thomas Kong stopped at the door, turned around with a bitter smile. Fate. Liu Que, your uncle doesn't want to bring disaster to you. I don't know if your grandfather was right or wrong not to teach you how to read bones or predict fate. If you find yourself in trouble, go to Jinjuan Temple for help. With that, Thomas Kong placed something on the table. Before I could ask, he hurriedly left the massage parlor. I rushed over and picked up the item. It was a bank card. Damn it, what does Thomas Kong mean by this? I ran outside, watching his figure disappear into the distance, my heart filled with mixed emotions. He said my grandfather didn't teach me how to read bones and predict fate. Could it be that my grandfather really knew such things? And what is Jinjuan Mountain? He was gone, and now I was left all alone. I didn't know if something else would happen tonight. It was already after 8 p.m., and the streets of Mist Town were completely silent. As I watched Thomas Kong turn the corner, just as I was about to head back, a piercing, horrifying scream echoed from the direction he had gone. I shuddered. It was Thomas Kang's voice. The agonizing cry echoed far and wide through the quiet night. I froze for a moment and then dashed madly toward the corner of the street. As soon as I turned, I saw Thomas Kong standing there, shrouded in a cloud of black mist. In the blink of an eye, the black mist rapidly dispersed from his body, and as it did, streams of blood sprayed from Thomas Kong. Finally, he collapsed to the ground. Before I could react, the black mist gathered in midair, forming a humanoid shape, and then disappeared with a swoosh. I rushed over, only to be met with a horrifying scene. The person lying on the ground was unrecognizable because their skin had been completely peeled off from head to toe. But judging by the body shape and the clothes and bundle nearby, it was clearly Thomas Kong. The skin of Thomas Kang's face was missing, leaving the exposed nerves and muscles visible. One of his eyeballs had detached from his face and was hanging by his cheek, while the other one stared blankly at me. His nose was reduced to 2 dark holes, and his mouth hung open, with his blood-stained teeth clearly visible. His body was in an even worse state. Without the skin to hold everything in place, some of the pale blood vessels had burst out, resembling broken tubes stuck into his body. Yellowish fat clung to his body like tofu dregs. Blood dripped from him, forming a large, still wet puddle underneath, with the sound of dripping echoing in the silence. At that moment, I couldn't hold back anymore, and I started to vomit violently. Ah! I screamed. Townspeople who heard the cry had already rushed out, witnessing everything and gasping in shock. Thomas Kong was dead. Thinking back, it seemed like Thomas Kong had anticipated something when he left my place. His words to me felt more like final parting words. I glanced back, seeing a large crowd gathering behind me. However, Thomas Kang's death was so horrifying that people couldn't help but scream, yet they didn't dare to come too close. Shortly afterward, I heard police sirens in the distance. It was clear that someone had called the authorities. I blended into the crowd, watching from afar. 2 police jeeps raced over, sirens blaring and lights flashing. The vehicles stopped at the corner, and 5 or 6 uniformed officers got out. They quickly set up a perimeter, securing the scene. An older officer called out to the crowd, who reported this. He repeated the question several times, but no one answered. The officer became frustrated and asked, "Who's the first witness?" Everyone around me simultaneously pointed in my direction, stepping back to reveal me. "Damn it!" I cursed under my breath. "You, come here," the officer ordered. I reluctantly walked over, bowing my head slightly. "Officer, I didn't kill him." The officer glanced at me sideways. "I didn't say you did. You're the first witness, and you need to come with us for questioning." He left a few officers to handle the scene and took me, along with 2 others, back to the station in a police car. At this point, there was no point in hiding anything. I told them everything they asked and even things they didn't. I informed them that there might be 2 more bodies on the mountain road of Hebaishan. I suspected that the path Thomas Kong and his group took wasn't a regular one, so no one might have discovered those bodies yet. Sure enough, the police were alarmed by this information and immediately sent out a search party. I was held for questioning at the station for a few hours and was released just before dawn. I strongly requested police protection, but they dismissed me, only giving me their phone number and telling me to keep my phone on 24/7 in case they needed to contact me. I was utterly disappointed, knowing full well that the deaths of these people were not caused by human hands. The police trying to solve this case is almost impossible. It's funny to think that just a day ago, I was still half believing in ghosts. But only after one night, I've experienced so many things: a dead child coming back to life, a shadow beside my bed, a peeled skin, corpse poison on my wrist. None of these can be explained by science. While I was still lost in my thoughts, I had returned to my massage parlor. From afar, I could see the place where Thomas Kong had his accident. The people had already dispersed. I sighed, preparing to open the door to go home. But as soon as my hand touched the door, a thought flashed through my mind: what exactly killed Thomas Kong? Was it a ghost or that ghostly child? Could it come back again? A series of questions raced through my mind, making me realize that this house was no longer the peaceful refuge it used to be, but more like a bottomless black hole just waiting for me to step in. In my hurry to leave, I hadn't closed the rolling door. I approached the window and looked inside. It was pitch dark, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and flipped the light switch. Damn it, another power outage. Luckily, my flashlight was still on the table. I picked it up, turned it on, and walked towards the bedroom. Fortunately, this time the TV didn't turn on like last time, which eased my nerves a bit. Maybe that ghost had already left. I couldn't keep scaring myself like this. This was the massage parlor that my grandfather left to me, my home. I couldn't just never come back. I comforted myself with those thoughts, but still, a chill ran down my spine. The unknown danger was making me anxious. The weak beam of the flashlight shone, and everything seemed as usual. But my gut told me that something must have happened. I approached the bedroom door, gently pushing it open. The wooden door creaked, sounding especially jarring in that moment. I shivered, shining the flashlight inside. The dim streetlight from outside shone faintly through the window, making me vaguely see a figure lying on the bed. Damn it, I really did encounter a ghost. Whatever you fear always seems to come. But I quickly realized that the figure looked flat, not like a human body, but more like a piece of clothing. I breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe it was just my clothes randomly thrown on the bed that I had forgotten. I slowly walked closer and shone the flashlight on the figure. But when the flashlight's beam hit it, I saw clearly and could hardly believe my eyes. On the bed, it wasn't a piece of clothing, but a blood-soaked human skin. The skin had been peeled off very neatly, lying on the bed in the shape of a person. Perhaps because it had been detached from the body, the skin was a dark, dull color. In some places, the blood hadn't completely dried, dripping down onto the bed, staining the sheets a deep crimson. At the head of the human skin lay a face, though its shape was no longer clear. However, the positions of the facial features were still recognizable. Looking at the features, I vaguely recognized it. It was the face of Thomas Kong, who had just died so tragically. Fear struck me, and I stepped back 2 paces. When I discovered Thomas Kang's body, I had witnessed the process of his skin being peeled off. But later, I noticed that the peeled-off skin had disappeared. I never expected it to appear on my bed. Staring at Thomas Kang's skin on my bed, my stomach churned violently, and bile surged up like a fountain. I couldn't hold it back any longer and squatted down, vomiting uncontrollably. While I was retching, I suddenly heard a faint, crackling sound from the bed. It was very soft, but I could hear it clearly. Slowly, I lifted my head and witnessed another unbelievable scene. The skin of Thomas Kong lying flat on the bed now appeared to be inflating, swelling up visibly. The crackling sound was the noise of the skin stretching, as if it were being filled with air. My legs gave way, leaving me completely powerless. I wanted to rush out of the room, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. If what was inflating on the bed had been just a doll, perhaps I could have handled it better. Unfortunately, it was the skin of Thomas Kong, who had just recently died. The skin gradually took form, the facial features slowly aligning on the lifeless face. The hollow, fish-like eyes stared at me with emptiness, while the lips curved into a mechanical smile. At that moment, I felt as though I was about to give up any resistance. All the events that had occurred in recent days were beyond my imagination, more terrifying than any horror movie I had ever seen. The inflated skin of Thomas Kong started moving, drifting through the air towards me. My entire body trembled, and I tried desperately to move backward, but there was already a wall behind me. Thomas Kong soon floated directly in front of me, his pale face getting closer and closer. I felt an icy chill envelop my entire body, making me shiver uncontrollably. Finally, I decided that I had to make one last desperate attempt to fight back. I was only 1 step away from the door. If I didn't run now, I might never get another chance. I let out a loud yell, throwing the flashlight in my hand at Thomas Kong and, at the same time, used both my hands and feet to crawl towards the door. Just as I turned around, I suddenly felt a flash of light behind me. Then, I heard a muffled groan that sounded like it came from a woman. I had already crawled outside the door, mustering up the courage to turn back and look. On the wall opposite my bedroom, I saw a bronze mirror hanging there, with a red talisman stuck to it. At this moment, the red lines on the talisman were glowing faintly. Thomas Kong, who had just seemed so fearsome, was now deflating like a pierced balloon, his body gradually shrinking. A stream of energy was escaping from Thomas Kang's body, slowly condensing into a human shape. Though I couldn't clearly see the facial features, I recognized the silhouette. It was just like the shadow I had seen standing at the door a few days ago. The shadowy figure didn't linger long. As soon as it formed, it quickly transformed into a misty silhouette, flashed through the door, and disappeared. The bronze mirror in the room no longer glowed, everything had returned to normal. The cold feeling in the room had vanished, and although I was drenched in sweat, the sense of having survived the ordeal made me feel comfortable. Once I calmed down, I remembered that the bronze mirror had been hung by my grandfather when he was still alive. He told me he had asked a Taoist priest for it, and it had the effect of warding off evil and ensuring peace. Back then, I didn't pay much attention to this so-called superstition, only the elderly believed in such things. But unexpectedly, it saved my life at a critical moment. After the cold aura dissipated, it left behind the skin of Thomas Kang, the skin crumpled up like a pile of old rags. I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, and tried my best not to think about that human skin until dawn arrived. The sunlight from outside gave me a sense of security. At first, I planned to deal with the skin, but then I discovered a more troublesome matter. I had used the method taught by Thomas Kang, using half-cooked glutinous rice to treat the corpse poison. Initially, it worked quite well, but this morning I found that the wound on my wrist had returned to its previous state, even worse. The red, swollen skin had become translucent, and the black lines inside had grown thicker. Even more terrifying was that the black lines had started to spread. Currently, half of my hand was swollen, with faint black lines appearing inside. Thomas Kang once said that these black lines would eventually spread throughout the body, and I would die painfully when the poison erupted. Among the people I had contact with, only Thomas Kang understood anything about this, but now he was dead. Before he died, he told me to find someone named David Chen, but I had no idea where Divine Officer Guan was. In the end, I had no choice but to go to the hospital again. When the doctor saw my hand, he was extremely shocked. The doctor and nurse exchanged glances, and finally, they simultaneously put on their masks. I cursed inwardly. I didn't have AIDS, why treat me like this? The doctor prepared several tests for me, and I ran from morning till noon, using almost every piece of examination equipment in this small hospital. Finally, the doctor tried to stay calm as he said, just try to live. How the hell am I supposed to do that? I threw the stack of test results in the doctor's face and ran out of the hospital. Outside, the sunlight was somewhat blinding, and I hid my hand in my sleeve. Suddenly, I remembered the card that Thomas Kang had left me before he died. The card was still in my pocket. I went to a nearby ATM to check, and the figure on the screen left me speechless, 150,000 yuan in the account. But I didn't feel any joy. The corpse poison in my wrist was getting worse, and Thomas Kang's method no longer worked. If this continued, I'd really have no way out but death. Money wouldn't do me any good. Besides, I knew well that this wound couldn't be cured in a hospital. I kept asking people on the street, but no one knew where Divine Officer Guan was. I wandered the streets like a walking corpse. Now the only way was to find that Divine Officer Guan that Thomas Kang had mentioned, hoping to find David Chen to help treat me. Just then, my phone rang. It was a call from the old policeman who had questioned me. On the phone, he told me that another murder had occurred in the town last night. A middle-aged woman was killed, her death identical to Thomas Kang's, also skinned alive. He asked if anything unusual had happened to me, and I said no. In fact, I had intended to tell him about Thomas Kang's skin appearing in my house last night, but considering that even if I told him, it might not help solve the case and could instead cause panic, I decided against it. I gave up on telling him about it. While talking to the policeman on the phone, I casually asked if he knew where Divine Officer Guan was. After all, as a policeman, he would definitely know more places than I did. The old policeman thought for a while, then said that there might be a temple near Ngolai Fa, outside the town, but he wasn't sure if it was the divine officer Guan I was looking for. Even though he spoke vaguely, at least I had a lead, a bit of hope. I immediately left Mist Town, heading toward Ngolai Fa outside the town. Mist Town lay in a region surrounded by mountains and forests of 4 provinces, and Ngolai Fa was just a small hill. As I left the town, the flow of people gradually thinned out. When I entered Ngolai Fa, the narrow mountain path was deserted, and I was alone. However, I soon realized that something was not quite right. I vaguely felt as if someone was following me. When I turned around, the mountain path was empty. I looked up at the sky. It was already late afternoon, and the sun was setting, but it was still bright enough. This gave me a bit of comfort. Having been haunted by ghosts for the past 2 days had made me nervous, but even if there were ghosts, they probably wouldn't dare to appear in broad daylight like this. I continued walking, but that strange feeling lingered, making my back cold and my steps uneasy. Suddenly, an idea flashed in my mind. I turned back, quickly hid in the woods beside the road, crouched down, and hid behind a tree, my eyes fixed on the long, narrow mountain path. Sure enough, before long, I heard light footsteps. A woman appeared in my line of sight. She was of average build, and I could only see her profile, a pale face with vacant eyes staring at the ground. I deliberately observed her closely and noticed that she cast a shadow. That made me feel more at ease, at least she wasn't a ghost. Once the woman passed by, I quietly followed her. It seemed she was trying to avoid me. I was walking slowly before, yet she always stayed far behind without overtaking me. After a while, she stopped by the roadside, then suddenly turned off the main path and headed into the mountain. I reached the place where she had turned and found that the area was full of trees and rocks, with lots of thorny plants. If someone went through, they would definitely be scratched. But she moved through without hesitation, as if she wasn't afraid of pain. Left with no choice, I continued along the original mountain path, hoping to find the so-called divine officer Guan. When I was nearing the top of the mountain, I still hadn't seen any trace of divine officer Guan. I began to doubt whether the old policeman's words were true. By now, it was getting dark, and the sun was almost set. I was starting to think about heading back, as staying on the mountain after dark was definitely not safe. Just then, I saw someone sitting on a rock by the roadside ahead. At first, I thought it was the woman I'd seen earlier, but upon closer inspection, it wasn't. This person sat lazily on the rock, his hair disheveled and a scruffy beard under his chin. His face was weathered, and I estimated that he was over 50. He squinted his eyes, looking drowsy. Finally seeing another person, I quickly walked a few steps and asked, "Excuse me, is there a temple named Divine Officer Guan nearby?" The old man opened his eyes, but they hardly seemed open at all, they were so small. He glanced at me with lazy eyes but said nothing. Thinking he didn't hear me, I asked again, "Sir, I'm asking you, is there a temple called Divine Officer Guan nearby?" The old man glared at me and replied, "Who are you calling, sir?" Hearing that, I was so shocked I nearly fell to the ground. His voice was clear, almost feminine, which contrasted sharply with his rugged appearance. Moreover, the voice sounded quite young, definitely not like someone over 50. "Why are you looking for Divine Officer Guan?" the man asked again. Hearing his voice gave me goosebumps, but it seemed like he knew about Divine Officer Guan. "Oh, I need to see the master for an important matter," I replied. "Go around the bend up there, and you'll find it," the man said impatiently. Upon hearing that, I was overjoyed, quickly thanked him, and ran ahead. After passing through a small grove, I indeed saw a dilapidated temple. From afar, I could see that the courtyard walls were overgrown with weeds, the temple itself was worn and damaged, and there wasn't even a name plaque. No wonder no one knew this place was Divine Officer Guan, it was obviously a neglected temple that hadn't been maintained for years. I smirked, thinking to myself, how could there be any cultivator here? I was just about to get closer for a better look when I suddenly noticed someone standing in front of the temple gate. In the fading twilight, I immediately recognized her as the woman I had met earlier on the road. She must have taken a shortcut and ended up here sooner. She stood there in front of the gate, looking vacant like a clay statue. Are you here to become a disciple too? I was still focused when suddenly, a soft, effeminate voice came from behind, startling me. I turned around and saw the rugged face of the old man. Embarrassed, I couldn't help but smirk. I paused for a moment, then asked, "Disciple? Disciple of what?" The man clearly saw the woman in front of the temple too. He made a sound of acknowledgement, then pulled me into the woods. So you're not here to become a disciple of David Chen? Then what are you here for? Is that woman with you? He confused me even more, and I shook my head. We're not together. Is there really someone cultivating in this broken-down temple? Of course. Let me tell you, inside there's David Chen, and he's the real deal. Just yesterday, I saw him catch a ghost child. Do you know what a ghost child is? It's a baby who died without reincarnating, and its resentment turned it into a vengeful spirit that possesses others. I glanced at the man beside me and curiously asked, "What's your name, friend? You don't look that old, why are you trying to learn this stuff?" "Humph, my name is Alex Wu. I've been interested in mysticism since I was a kid, and I've always been self-taught. I heard that David Chen here is quite skilled, so I came to try my luck." "What's your name, brother?" Looking at Alex Wu's rugged face while he called me brother felt strange. "My name is William Liu." "Alright, no more talking. I need to find David Chen for something important." After saying that, I stood up, intending to head toward Divine Officer Guan. Alex Wu immediately pulled me back. "Wait. I think that woman is not normal." I was startled. "Not normal? What's wrong with her? Do you know what's on the gate of Divine Officer Guan?" Alex Wu asked. "I've never been here, how would I know? Is it a door god?" "It's not a door god, it's Zhong Kuei," Alex Wu replied. "Zhong Kuei captures ghosts, and not only captures them but also devours them. I think there's something strange about that woman. She's been standing there for a long time without daring to go in. I think she's waiting until it's dark, when the yin energy is stronger, to make her move." "You mean that woman is a ghost? How could that be?" "She has a shadow," I replied. Just then, the woman suddenly looked up at the sky, then turned her head to look at us. She twisted her head in a very peculiar way, her body remained still while her neck turned 180 degrees. On her expressionless face suddenly appeared a grim smile. I shivered as I remembered what the old policeman had told me about a middle-aged woman who died last night and had her skin peeled off. Could this woman be? The woman turned her head again and began to walk step by step into the courtyard. She pushed open the gate, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I glanced at Alex Wu, and he was staring intently at the woman. She entered through the gate and then fell silent. By this time, it was completely dark, and everything around was eerily still. Alex Wu and I hid in the woods across from Divine Officer Guan, watching for any movement. I thought to myself, even if the woman was just a regular person, sneaking into a temple alone in the middle of the night must mean she was up to something shady. After a while, I saw the woman come back out of the courtyard, holding something in her arms. At the same time, I heard several chirping sounds. Cold sweat immediately broke out all over my body. I vividly remembered that sound. It was the same noise that came from the dead child that crawled out of Thomas Kang's bundle that night. It had even scratched me, infecting me with corpse poison. The sound seemed to be coming from the woman's arms, which meant she was holding a ghostly child. Recalling what Alex Wu had said about David Chen capturing a baby spirit yesterday, I blurted out, "Oh no, she's here to rescue the baby spirit." Hearing that, Alex Wu immediately rushed out without saying another word. With his large frame, he charged towards the woman, shouting, "Stop! Put that baby spirit down!" Alex Wu's shout sounded somewhat feminine, which completely ruined the atmosphere. The woman showed no emotion, saw Alex Wu, and without saying a word, slapped him directly. Her movement was strange, and Alex Wu couldn't dodge in time. He was hit on the shoulder, screamed in pain, and was sent flying 5 or 6 meters away. At this point, I had no choice but to brace myself and charge forward. After all, we were here to ask for help, and it wouldn't be right to not offer any help. As soon as I showed my face, I saw a dead child shoot out from the woman's arms. When it got closer, I could see clearly, it was the same corpse that had escaped from my place before. By now, most of the rotten flesh on its body had fallen off, revealing pale white bones in many places. I shouted, "Oh my God," and turned to run. Just then, a loud voice suddenly rang out from Divine Officer Guan. The voice was so powerful that it made me shiver. I looked back and saw that the dead child was hovering in midair, heading straight into the woods. A figure appeared, threw out a yellow talisman, and stuck it straight to the back of the child's head. The red patterns on the talisman glowed, and the child let out 2 cries before falling to the ground, motionless. The figure wore a gray robe, but his hair was not tied up. He approached, grabbed the child's neck, stuffed it into a bag, and then turned to face the woman. At this moment, the woman was about to attack Alex Wu, but upon seeing the child captured, she let out a chilling scream, her face contorted in a terrifying way. She screamed and rushed towards the Taoist. The Taoist snorted coldly, holding a talisman with 2 fingers, chanting a spell, and shouted. At the same time, he shot out the yellow talisman, which stuck directly to the woman's face. Strangely, the talisman caught fire without any source, burning the woman's face with a sizzling sound. She shook her body, suddenly opened her eyes, and a white figure emerged from her body, quickly forming a human shape. In the air, the ghost glared at us with a resentful face before disappearing. The Taoist sighed and said, "This evildoer has committed terrible sins, killing people, using their skin to deceive the police. Such crimes are unforgivable." I went over to help Alex Wu up. The Taoist turned and clasped his hands together in a gesture of thanks to us. "Thank you both for your assistance." This female ghost disguised as a human skin infiltrated Divine Officer Guan, known as Baby Zombie. If Baby Zombie escaped again, it would be much harder to capture her. I hurriedly waved my hands, saying, "You must be David Chen, right? I was once attacked by Baby Zombie. I've been infected by corpse poison. I'm here to ask for your help." "Corpse poison?" David Chen was surprised. I quickly rolled up my sleeve, revealing the wound. David Chen nodded. "If it were just ordinary corpse poison, you could use sticky rice to draw it out. But for the poison of the Baby Zombie, only the one who tied the bell can untie it. This means we need to find the place where the ghost child that bit your wrist was buried." "I know that place, it's in the burial ground in the Habich Mountains," I immediately said. David Chen nodded. "In this world, all things have a counterbalance, an endless cycle. The fact that this ghost child can continue to survive is because, apart from being pinned by a soul-stabilizing needle, there must also be a type of plant called tula grass near the burial ground. Tula grass grows together with bones. It's the best thing for treating corpse poison." "Great, then all we need to do is go pick it, right?" Alex Wu interjected. "Sounds easy, but you two want to go?" Tula grass likes darkness and only appears at midnight, and the yin energy is the heaviest. At that time, the burial ground will surely be filled with vengeful spirits, extremely dangerous, especially those graves where the bones are cursed. Unfortunately, tonight I have to capture that female ghost, otherwise, who knows how many more people she'll harm. "Master, I'll go with William Liu. I've studied this before and have some basic knowledge of Taoism," Alex Wu said, suddenly speaking up. David Chen pondered for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we can't delay any longer. If the corpse poison isn't treated in time, not only will you lose your hand, but also your life. 2 La grass and white mushroom are very easy to recognize. If you find them in the burial ground, just pick 3 plants. Brew them into a potion and apply it to the wound. If you encounter anything unusual, escape is your priority. Alex Wu grinned and asked, Master, when I return, you'll accept me as your disciple, right? David Chen snorted coldly, first, make sure you come back alive, then we'll talk. I have 2 peachwood swords here. They aren't of Zhangzhenren, but they aren't ordinary either. Take them for your protection. After saying that, David Chen handed us the 2 peachwood swords. He then adjusted his robe and rushed down the mountain. Master, keep your word. I'll find you when I return. Alex Wu shouted in a feminine voice. Let's go, we shouldn't waste time. We should head out right now, find a car, and go to Habich. Alex Wu seemed quite excited at this point. I glanced at him, are you okay? You look like you've just found 100 yuan. You think you can handle this? Alex Wu rolled his eyes at me, didn't you hear? Master said if I return, he'll accept me as his disciple. I'm doing this for you, understand? I didn't hear David Chen say he'd accept you as a disciple. You don't understand, people who practice Taoism never make things so clear. Are you going or not? After all, this is for your survival. Well. It has come to this, although I don't have much confidence in Alex Wu, I guess I can only take it step by step. We ran all the way back to Mist Town. Alex Wu asked me to tell him in detail how I got injured, so I briefly explained the situation. After listening, Alex Wu nodded, checked his watch, and said, there's still some time before midnight. Find a car, and we'll meet at the south gate in an hour. After saying that, Alex Wu left. I didn't ask him what he was going to do. Instead, I went to arrange a taxi and set an appointment to meet at the south gate in an hour. During this time, I went back home and quietly burned the skin of Thomas Kong. Keeping it around was just giving me more anxiety. I didn't dare open the window, afraid the neighbors would smell it. Underneath Thomas Kang's skin was a layer of grease that burned easily. Even though I turned on all the fans and the exhaust hood, the smell of burnt skin still filled the room. Finally, I buried the ashes and remnants outside. I headed to the south gate to meet Alex Wu. It seemed that business was slow for taxis, as the car had arrived even though I got there 15 minutes early. We waited for over half an hour before Alex Wu came, carrying a big bag and running over. The driver was a young guy who had been waiting so long that he was visibly annoyed. He asked where we were going with a disgruntled look. I only vaguely knew the location of the burial ground at Habich, about 15 miles south of the gate, so I told the driver, to Habich. Unexpectedly, the driver shuddered, turned around, and looked at me like I was crazy. I asked, what's wrong? The young driver shook his head and said, I heard that place had a death recently, and it was said that something unclean took out the person's internal organs and even their lower body. You really want to go there at this hour? I was surprised at how quickly the taxi driver had caught on to the news. It must have been after I told the police that they went to investigate. There was no other option, so I continued to beg him, it's late at night, we need a car. In the end, the driver asked for 1,000 yuan before agreeing. I felt a little pain thinking about it, 1,000 yuan, this driver was really asking for too much. But there was no other choice. I had no choice but to agree with him. Even so, the driver kept complaining while starting the car, leaving Mist Town. 15 miles is neither too far nor too near, but after leaving the town, the road became quite bumpy, making it impossible for the car to go fast. The young driver seemed to be quite talkative, constantly complaining along the way. In short, his main point was that this trip cost him more than it was worth, the car's wear and tear aside, he also had to endure fear and anxiety. Damn it, I paid him 1,000 yuan, yet he acted as if I owed him something. He kept mumbling the entire way, making me irritated. Eventually, the driver started talking about how terrifying Mount Hebe was, mentioning ghosts and corpses, which sent shivers down my spine. During all of this, Alex Wu was sleeping the whole time, not waking up once. Finally, after a stretch of mountain road, the car came to a stop. The driver pointed ahead and said, "That's Mount Hebe ahead of you, now pay and get off." What? I looked at the odometer. It showed that we had only traveled about 10 miles from Miss Town. I said, "We haven't arrived yet." The driver waved his hand and said, "This is as far as I can take you. It's too dangerous up ahead. I can't risk my life for money." I cursed in my heart. This guy was really lacking in morals. I nodded and said, "Fine, I'll get off and pay you." With that, both Alex Wu and I opened the car doors, each carrying our own bags. We exchanged glances and then looked at the driver. Then, we suddenly sprinted up the mountain. The driver cursed and started the car, chasing us. I dashed into the nearby woods, shouting, "You bastard! Here's a lesson for you. Come get us if you can. If you're not afraid of ghosts, then chase us. Damn it, you idiot." The driver jumped out of the car, furiously pointing at us and cursing, but I paid no attention to him. I figured he wouldn't dare follow us into the woods. We ran deeper into the forest, looking at each other and laughing. Alex Wu crouched down and started taking clothes out of his bag. In no time, he had changed into a complete outfit, dressed like a Taoist priest, wearing a gray robe adorned with yin-yang in 8 trigram symbols. However, since his hair wasn't tied up, he looked rather silly. Alex Wu held a peachwood sword in his hand and took another one out of his bag, handing it to me. "Take this for self-defense. This thing that master gave me is really well made." I took the peachwood sword, carefully orienting myself, and said, "It seems like we're just at the edge of Mount Hebe. From what I remember, the mass grave is still about 10 miles away. Damn, that driver really tricked us." "It's not an exaggeration to say we scammed him a little," Alex Wu swore, "but there was nothing we could do, we'd have to walk the remaining 10 miles. After the taxi left, the entire mountain was silent again, dark shadows of trees swaying like ghostly figures, and from time to time, birds flew out of the woods, their sudden flapping startling us. Alex Wu took out a flashlight, holding it in one hand and a peachwood sword in the other. As we walked, I asked him, "Do you think you can handle it if we encounter any ghosts? I don't want to die from corpse poison just to get eaten by ghosts." Alex Wu scoffed, "You underestimate me. Let me tell you, as long as we don't run into a ghost that's over 100 years old, those lesser ghosts are no match for me." "Really? There are ghosts that are over 100 years old?" "Of course there are. If no other factors intervene, the power of a ghost is related to how long it's been around. The reason they can't reincarnate is that they still hold on to grievances in their hearts, and this resentment only grows stronger over time unless someone can help dissolve it," Alex Wu explained. Listening to him talk, I found it quite interesting and asked, "So what are those other factors you mentioned?" "Obviously, external forces, like Taoists, ghost tamers, ghost trainers, and some other obscure professions. They may seek out resentful ghosts, pretend to train them, and turn them into tools that obey them. These trained ghosts are usually more dangerous and could kill us in an instant." Hearing this, I suddenly remembered something. Thomas Kong had mentioned that there were buyers who offered high prices for infant spirits that had been sealed. I told this story to Alex Wu, and he nodded. I suspect that the buyer was someone involved in this kind of trade. They would raise those dead infant spirits. The spirits of infants who died shortly after birth are filled with resentment. They haven't yet experienced the world, and just as they were finally reborn as humans, they died again. If they manage to raise such spirits, their attacking power is incredibly strong. So the dead infant spirit that attacked me was for this purpose. Just thinking of that child's corpse still filled me with fear. Probably. It wasn't fully raised, so you can't call it a ghost child yet, just a dead infant. Now that it poisoned you, who knows what it would be like if fully trained. I nodded, realizing that Alex Wu knew quite a lot, so I continued asking. That's right, the two people who went with Thomas Kong to dig up the corpse were also killed, and both their internal organs and genitals were missing. Humans consume grains, and the internal organs are the part of the body where vital energy accumulates the most. In places with heavy yin energy, it's the same. Just like that human skin, the spirits that haven't fully formed must consume these things to absorb a certain amount of vital energy so they can hide themselves better. Those two were unlucky, having provoked a spirit that needed parts from their bodies. As we moved deeper into the valley, talking as we walked, the deeper we went, the colder it got, and I began to smell a strange, distinct stench. Neither I nor Alex Wu knew the way to the Yin Valley Cemetery. Alex Wu would occasionally take out a candle, light it to determine the direction. He told me it was an Yin bamboo candle, whose flame was special. There's a saying that goes, the Yin energy fuels it, the Yang energy gathers it, meaning the more Yin energy there is, the stronger the flame becomes, and normal wind can't blow it out. Only when the Yang energy is strong enough can it extinguish the candle. Alex Wu used the flame of this Yin bamboo candle to determine the location of the Yin bone cemetery, heading toward the areas with the heaviest Yin energy. As we walked further, the stench grew stronger. As we moved forward, Alex Wu suddenly grabbed me. I turned to look at him, and his face was full of tension. What's wrong? Something's off, this place feels very wrong, Alex Wu mumbled, as if answering me, but also speaking to himself. What exactly is wrong? I asked, my heart racing. Sword energy, Alex Wu looked toward the Yin Valley Cemetery. The sword energy here is too strong. How can it be this heavy? Since I first met Alex Wu, he'd been bragging non-stop. I had never seen him so serious before. Alex Wu pointed ahead, saying, if I'm not mistaken, the Yin Valley Cemetery should be over there. The flashlight beam flickered like fireflies in the mountains. Under the moonlight, I could vaguely see the outline of small mounds. Let's go take a look, Alex Wu gripped his peachwood sword, crouching as he crept forward. As we got closer, I realized that those small mounds were actually graves, but these graves were smaller than usual. Roughly estimating, there were about 100 or 200 of them. The shadows of trees swayed, a cold wind howled, and dead leaves and pebbles swirled in the air. It seemed like this was the famous Yin Valley Cemetery. When we arrived here, the stench became almost unbearable, and I had to cover my nose, afraid that I might throw up if I inhaled too much. Alex Wu led me to hide in a concealed spot within the cemetery. I was about to say something when Alex Wu signaled for me to be quiet and listen. I heard a faint sound of flowing water. Strange, there shouldn't be any streams around here. I began to understand why the sword energy in this place was so intense. Alex Wu handed me the flashlight and started rummaging through his backpack. He pulled out an old book and, under the flashlight's glow, started flipping through it. I saw many strange drawings and some annotations. Are you kidding me? Are you learning this on the spot? I exclaimed, nearly crying in frustration. Alex Wu responded, nonsense. This stuff is vast and profound. I'm still young, without much experience, how could I have learned it all yet? Stop interrupting. After a few minutes, he closed the book and muttered, just as I thought. What's going on? I asked anxiously. Alex Wu pointed ahead. That blood river should be around that cemetery. But now I need to confirm something. Follow me carefully. Alex Wu led me closer to the graves. Now, I could clearly hear the sound of flowing water, and in front of us was a dirt trench about a meter wide. The flashlight illuminated the inside, and to my horror, I saw that the trench was full of blood, flowing like a stream. The sound of water and the stench came from this very place. This is a blood river and immense sword energy, Alex Wu suddenly said. Blood river and sword energy? What's that? I've never heard of it, I asked. A blood river and sword energy is an evil formation used to gather resentment and yin energy, often for raising corpses. Raising corpses? Are you saying this formation was intentionally created? Of course. I just saw how the blood river twists around the Yin Valley Cemetery, and the person who set up the formation used snow pear wood along with ancient coins, placing them in 8 specific locations underground. I think they're trying to turn all the corpses here into ghouls. Thomas Kong was lucky, the corpse he encountered hadn't fully formed yet. Otherwise, he would have died on the spot. So, has it fully formed now? Hearing Alex Wu's explanation made me even more nervous. Hard to say. It looks like I shouldn't have taken this job today. But I have no regrets. I've spent my life cultivating, and getting to witness the formation of a blood river and sword energy is worth it. Alex Wu continued. Besides, I already agreed to help you. I will definitely help you get this done, Alex Wu said calmly. At that moment, I suddenly felt that although Alex Wu was a bit of a joker, he was still a reliable person. William Liu, in a moment, will charge right in. Remember, as long as we cure your damp toxin, we need to finish this as fast as possible and leave immediately. I nodded. Since he was risking his life, I couldn't back down either. Alex Wu stared at the graveyard, waved his sword, and whispered, "Go." Alex Wu and I sprinted toward the graveyard at full speed, like running a 100-meter dash. When we crossed the blood-filled ditch, I clearly felt a cold aura emanating from it. As we charged into the graveyard, the densely packed mounds and graves made my scalp tingle. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind swept through the graveyard. "What are you standing there for? Start searching!" Alex Wu shouted. I quickly crouched down and began searching for the shura grass around the graves. The entire graveyard was overgrown with weeds, some as tall as half a person. Some of the grave mounds were intact, while others had partially collapsed, revealing the pale bones inside, glowing faintly under the moonlight. After searching a couple of graves, I finally spotted a plant about half a foot tall growing under a collapsed grave mound. The plant had 4 purple leaves, each supporting something that looked like a mushroom cap, pure white in color. This purple-leaved white mushroom was none other than the shura grass. I was overjoyed and quickly reached out to pick it, but just as I extended my hand, the soil inside the grave began to shift, and suddenly, a small hand reached out. Ah! I screamed in shock, cold sweat pouring down my body. I cried out in fear as I saw the small hand gradually extend into an arm. The muscles and skin on the arm were tightly stretched, resembling the dried corpses I had seen on TV. After the dried arm reached out, it made a strange movement and grabbed hold of my ankle. "Help! Damn it!" I yelled as I fell to the ground, kicking hard to free myself from the hand. But instead of shaking it off, I ended up pulling it out of the grave. At that moment, I saw it was another corpse child. However, unlike the one I had seen before, this one's body was almost entirely dried up, looking more like a small mummy. "Use the peachwood sword and chop it." Alex Wu shouted from behind me, though I had no idea when he had gotten there. I suddenly came to my senses and quickly swung the peachwood sword in my hand at the dried baby corpse. Surprisingly, the sword worked well against it. With one slice, I chopped the withered arm, and the hand gripping my ankle immediately let go. Alex Wu rushed forward and stabbed the baby corpse in the face with his sword. Though the peachwood sword was made of wood, it pierced right through the baby's head. I breathed a sigh of relief and quickly stood up. "Something's wrong. We need to retreat now." Alex Wu ran forward, pulled out the shura grass, but by that time, it was already too late for us to leave. Inside the graveyard, gusts of cold wind swirled into tornadoes above the mounds. In these whirlwinds, the wails of ghosts and wolves echoed, piercing my ears and disturbing my mind. At the same time, I saw more and more arms emerging from the graves, like bamboo shoots after the rain, waving in the air. I had never seen anything like this before and was completely petrified. I looked over at Alex Wu, his face pale, sweat dripping down in large beads. At that moment, Alex Wu started rummaging through his backpack again. "Are you serious? You still need to read to figure it out." I yelled in panic, spinning around as small arms and whirlwinds of cold wind surrounded us. Ignoring me, Alex Wu pulled out a stack of yellow paper and ghost money from his bag and handed me a lighter. "Hurry, burn it. I got these from a paper crafts shop after a lot of trouble. Even ghosts bow to money, this rule holds true everywhere." Alex Wu said. "Seriously? This is your solution?" I cursed. It turned out that during the time he had been away from me, Alex Wu had gone to prepare these things. Both of our hands were trembling, and after much struggle, we managed to light one yellow paper. Squatting on the ground, we started burning the paper one by one. "Damn, these ghost bills are printed so realistically, it pains me to burn them," I said. "I bought all of this, so when we settle up, I'll deduct it from your payment," Alex Wu grumbled. After burning quite a bit of ghost money, the papers were swept up into the air by the cold wind, swirling like a cloud of black butterflies. But the situation before us didn't improve at all. The wailing of the ghosts only grew louder, and more arms continued to rise from the graves. "Damn, I forgot. These are all the spirits of dead babies. They've never experienced life, so they don't understand the value of money." "Luckily, I came prepared," Alex Wu said as he pulled another bag from his backpack. To my surprise, inside were paper toys, small toy cars, dolls, pinwheels, and more. Clearly, these were hastily made by the shop, and the craftsmanship wasn't all that great. "Will these even work? Let's give it a try," Alex Wu said, casually tossing a toy car into the fire. The toy car instantly burst into flames and turned to ash in seconds. The ash was caught by the wind and swirled around, floating in all directions, but not dispersing. "Look! They're fighting over it. Keep burning more," Alex Wu shouted. We hurriedly threw the rest of the paper toys and ghost money into the fire. In no time, the sky was filled with swirling ashes, the cold wind blew continuously, and the sound of ghostly wailing gradually diminished. I faintly heard the laughter of children. "Quick, let's go." Alex Wu pulled me along, and we ran toward the edge of the graveyard. At that moment, it seemed the ghostly spirits of the children had really been attracted by the burning paper toys. We ran several meters without encountering any obstacles. We passed mound after mound, running as fast as we could. I knew that once we got out of this valley, we would be safe. But after running for more than 10 minutes, covering what felt like at least 3 to 5 miles, it seemed like we hadn't made it out yet. Up ahead, Alex Wu suddenly stopped, leaning over with his hands on his knees, panting heavily. I was also out of breath, exhausted and gasping for air. "Damn it, I'm going to die of exhaustion. Why did you stop running?" I asked, breathless. "Run where?" "Look." Alex Wu pointed ahead, his face pale. I looked and saw a baby's corpse lying on the ground, with a hole in its head. It was the same dead baby Alex Wu had killed earlier. A loud ringing filled my head. We had run 5 miles, only to circle back to the same spot. Could it be that we had been running in circles the whole time? "Damn it, we're trapped in a ghost loop," I shouted in panic. "Yeah, we've probably been running around the graves in circles," Alex Wu said cautiously, looking around. "So what do we do now? Should we wait until morning?" "That's not an option. We've come at a really bad time. It looks like today is the day the person who set up this corpse-raising formation was planning to activate it. The zombies weren't fully formed yet, but we've disrupted things. If the corpse raiser shows up, we'll be silenced for sure. I regret not properly reading your fortune earlier. If you had given me 10,000 yuan, I wouldn't have come to this damned place. Stop joking and think of something. I urged. Stop rushing me, I'm thinking. Alex Wu looked around, then suddenly pointed ahead. I've got an idea, look over there. I followed the direction of his hand and saw an ancient locust tree, much larger than the other trees around it. Its roots jutted out from the ground, twisted like dragon's claws. A locust tree. Alex Wu nodded. I know that in the town of Xiehe, there's a formation rock at the end of a 9-bend river, and the final bend is connected to a formation rock. This locust tree must be hundreds, if not thousands, of years old, making it the formation rock. Let's check it out. Alex Wu led me toward the tree, and under it, sure enough, there was a pool of blood where the blood river had gathered. The blood in the pool was bubbling, giving off a strong, foul stench. Alex Wu pointed at the pool and said, if we follow this blood river, we can get out of here. I saw the blood river winding its way into the pool, as if encircling the entire graveyard. If we could follow it and find the exit, it might be our best chance. Without further hesitation, we ran along the blood river. The blood river was actually just a man-made ditch filled with liquid that resembled blood. It was eerie. Holding my breath to avoid the stench, I followed Alex Wu, winding around the bends as the blood river twisted. As we passed by mounds, many of the undead babies had crawled out and blocked our way. We swung our peachwood swords as we ran, and Alex Wu chanted some kind of incantation under his breath. Fortunately, we didn't encounter anything too dangerous. After running for about 5 or 6 minutes, I saw a mountain range in the distance. The sight of the mountains meant we were close to escaping this valley. Filled with hope, we ran even faster. But just as we were about to break free, 2 sharp cracks echoed through the valley. I jumped in surprise, and both Alex Wu and I stopped in our tracks. With the 2 cracks, the entire valley was suddenly filled with the howls of ghosts once again. It seemed that those 2 sounds had awakened the spirits. The corpse raiser is here. Alex Wu whispered. I looked back and saw countless baby corpses crawling toward us from the path we had just taken. Behind them, the cold wind rose again, lifting dust and black mist that covered the sky. Among them, ghostly wails and cries filled the air. Alex Wu wiped the sweat from his forehead, raised his peachwood sword, and made a hand gesture. In a loud voice, he proclaimed, I am Alex Wu, a disciple of the Wu Lipa True Lord School. I have come seeking Shura grass and meant no offense. I humbly ask the senior spirits to show mercy and grant us safe passage. We will repay your kindness one day. In that moment, Alex Wu was completely transformed from his usual scruffy self. His Taoist robes fluttered in the wind, and standing there with his sword, he radiated an aura of righteousness. His words were spoken with dignity and firmness, reflecting the presence of a true master of the Tao. The crisp sound of a whip echoed in response to Alex Wu. The zombie children stared with their wide, fish-like eyes and leaped up from the ground, lunging toward us. In the cold wind behind, shadows appeared and started to surround us. Damn it, you refuse to drink to my toast, so you're asking for punishment. If I don't show you my power, you won't know how strong I am. Alex Wu cursed, suddenly spitting a mist of blood onto the peachwood sword in his hand. Just at that moment, a zombie child flew toward him. Alex Wu roared, die, and thrust the sword forward. The zombie tried to dodge, but the sword pierced straight through its chest. At the same time, many dark figures moved in as the cold wind howled. Alex Wu pulled out several talismans from his pocket and threw them at the shadows. The talismans ignited on their own and flew into the cold wind. After a chilling scream, the shadows dispersed into the air. Seeing his attack succeed, Alex Wu grew more confident. He shouted, raised his sword, and charged into the swarm of zombie children. The whip cracks continued to echo, like a death curse urging the zombies and shadows to attack relentlessly. Alex Wu kept spitting blood on his sword and talismans, but soon he began to weaken. I gritted my teeth. When fear reaches its peak, your actions are no longer under your control. Seeing Alex Wu struggling, I grabbed the peachwood sword and prepared to charge forward to help him. Just as I started, a zombie child jumped at me. I shouted, "Die," and thrust my sword into its chest. However, instead of piercing it, the peachwood sword was repelled as if it had struck leather. The skin of the zombie was as tough as hide. The zombie bounced back slightly, then jumped again. I looked at its shriveled face, its mouth open to reveal sharp, white fangs, more like a beast than a human. Its bloodshot eyes were filled with malice as it grabbed my shoulders with both hands, trying to bite my throat. I could smell the foul stench from its mouth, but I was powerless to stop it. Alex Wu was completely trapped and had no way of saving me. The zombie let out a gurgling noise from its throat as it lunged closer. Instinctively, I raised my left hand to block it. My left hand, already numb and lifeless, had dark veins spread across it, making it almost useless. But strangely, as soon as I touched the zombie, my left hand regained its sensation. I had no time to think about why. I pushed hard against the zombie to stop it from biting my throat. What happened next shocked me. My hand pushed the zombie's body back 5 or 6 meters. The zombie seemed severely injured, rolling a few times on the ground, and didn't get up again. I stared at my hand in disbelief, but it looked no different than before. Help! Damn it, help me! Alex Wu's desperate cry came from the other side. I saw him being chased by a group of zombie children, barely able to defend himself. Since my hand could push the zombie away, I gathered my courage and prepared to rush over to save him. But suddenly, from behind me, 2 more whip cracks rang out. At the same time, I felt something tighten around my neck. Before I could react, my body was lifted off the ground and suspended in the air. I opened my mouth to scream, but my neck was so tightly constricted that no sound came out. My body was pulled up into the air, then quickly dropped, crashing hard onto the ground. I was nearly knocked unconscious by the impact, seeing stars flashing before my eyes, feeling as if my body had been broken. As I regained my senses, I saw a figure dressed in black standing in front of me. He wore a long black robe and a wide-brimmed hat. With the light behind him, I couldn't make out his face, but I saw a long whip dragging on the ground in his hand. It was clear that this whip had been used to pull me in. "Who are you?" I gasped, trying to catch my breath, and asked the figure in black. "Lucas Liu, what is he to you?" The man's voice was deep and raspy, as if his throat were constricted. His words were hard to understand, but the mention of that name startled me. "Lucas Liu is my grandfather. Why are you bringing him up here? What is your relationship with him?" A flood of questions ran through my mind, leaving me stunned on the spot. The black-robed man suddenly flicked his wrist, and the whip in his hand straightened, cutting through the air with a crisp crack. I flinched in fear. "That bastard Lucas Liu, what is he to you?" His raspy voice sounded again. "You're the bastard. Lucas Liu is my grandfather." I shouted, unable to stand him insulting my grandfather. "So, you are the descendant of Lucas Liu. That soul hand of yours, he gave it to you, didn't he? That old man swore he wouldn't pass it down to his descendants, and yet here he is, breaking his word again. Isn't he afraid of divine punishment?" The black-robed man spoke coldly. I was confused by his words. "What are you talking about? I don't understand. But if you insult my grandfather again, I'll kill you no matter what." I yelled at the man. "Why didn't Lucas Liu come here himself? Sending 2 kids like you, is he looking down on me?" the man asked. "My grandfather passed away 6 months ago." "I don't understand what you're saying," I replied, shaking my head. "Dead?" The man in black paused for a moment, then suddenly let out a strange, maniacal laugh. His laughter pierced the night, scaring away the birds in the surrounding forest. Ha! That bastard Lucas Liu thought he could fool me by faking his death, even tricking his own grandson. Shut up! Don't you dare insult my grandfather! I screamed, rushing at him with the peachwood sword in hand. But before I could get close, the black-robed man's whip struck. The whip flicked, hitting me square in the chest. I didn't feel any pain. I only felt a sharp pain in my chest and was thrown far away. Kid, I have a deep connection with your grandfather. You can be considered his descendant, so today I'll spare you both. Leave here immediately and never come back. If you do, I'll take your life. Also, I'll tell you a secret, your grandfather isn't dead, he only pretended to be to deceive you. Go find him quickly. You're lying. I saw with my own eyes when my grandfather was buried. How can he still be alive? Believe it or not. After saying that, the man in black flicked his whip in the air, producing sharp cracking sounds. Along with the cracking sound, the eerie wind around us suddenly stopped. The man in black swiftly moved, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Everything happened so quickly that I didn't have time to react. When everything around me returned to silence, I suddenly remembered Alex Wu. On tu ni. On tu ni. I shouted a few times, frantically searching. After shouting 7 or 8 times, I finally heard a weak response from under a grave mound. Damn it, stop yelling, I'm not dead yet. I followed the sound and found Alex Wu leaning against a tombstone, drenched in sweat. Are you okay? I squatted down and asked. At least you didn't abandon me, so you've got some conscience. I'm fine, but I've been coughing up too much blood and I'm exhausted. Damn, this is the most brutal battle I've ever fought. Where did you go earlier? I ran into the corpse tamer. That whip sound came from him, I replied. He said a bunch of nonsense and eventually decided to let us go. Anyway, we should leave now, this place is too eerie. Alex Wu struggled to his feet. Damn it, but we still haven't collected enough shura grass. I suddenly remembered the purpose of our journey and anxiously looked around. Alex Wu waved his hand, don't bother looking anymore. Shura grass only appears during the hour of the rat, when the yin energy is strongest. The time has long passed. Luckily, we already collected 3 stalks. Let's head back. I nodded, gritting my teeth as I endured the pain and helped Alex Wu walk back down the mountain, swaying with every step. The man in black kept his word, he didn't set any traps for us, and there were no ghostly illusions anymore. We easily made our way out of the British cemetery. On the way down, I recounted everything that had happened to Alex Wu. After listening, he asked, you're saying you used that paralyzed hand of yours to push back a corpse? I nodded. Alex Wu grabbed my hand, inspecting it closely, but couldn't find anything unusual. Your hand is now completely numb, without any feeling. But when you touched the corpse, you regained sensation. Yes. That's a typical symptom of being poisoned by yin energy. As for why it happened, I'm not entirely sure. Let's head back first. We'll use the shura grass to treat your hand. It can't stay numb forever, Alex Wu said. I then recalled what the man in black mentioned about soul-searching hand, and asked, do you know what that means? No, I've never heard of it, Alex Wu shook his head. Then again, I'm always reading up on things and learning as I go. I can't know everything. But what bothered me most was what the man in black had said about Lucas Liu. He had confidently claimed that my grandfather faked his death to hide something from me. Why would he say that? Thomas Kong had also hinted that my grandfather had some ability to predict things and questioned whether it was right or wrong that he hadn't taught me those skills. Could it be that my grandfather had indeed kept secrets from me? As we descended the mountain, I kept thinking about it, but I couldn't figure it out. When we finally reached the base of the mountain, the sky was already beginning to lighten. This was a mountainous area, so I figured no cars would be passing by at this hour. Both of us were exhausted after the ordeal, and if we had to walk back, it would be grueling. But luckily, when we reached the bottom, we saw a taxi parked by the side of the road. Overjoyed, we quickly rushed over and climbed into the back seat. "Driver, take us back to the city." I barely got the words out before the driver turned around. "Damn it, isn't this the same car we came in?" It was the unlucky driver from before, his eyes bloodshot as he glared at us. "It's you two again. Damn it, if you hadn't paid me, I wouldn't have stayed. This is the only way down the mountain, so I knew you'd come back here. Now pay up." The angry driver growled. "Calm down, no need to make a scene. I'll pay you double this time," I tried to soothe him. "Humph, you managed to survive up there, so you're no ordinary folks. Forget the dirty money, just pay me for the ride up and we'll call it even," the driver said as he started the car. As we headed back, my mind kept wandering to thoughts about my grandfather, and it stayed that way until the car dropped us off at the massage parlor. In the incense burner, there were 3 sticks of incense burning. At the tip of the incense, you could see a faint wisp of smoke, but it disappeared as it rose. Before Alex Wu could ask, I explained to him about this room and the circumstances before my grandfather passed away. The memorial plaque was something my grandfather had prepared before his death. Although I couldn't understand a few characters at the beginning, I did know the meaning of the 4 characters, Lucas Liu. Every time my grandfather touched that plaque, I would ask him why he had prepared it, saying it was bad luck. But he just shook his head and smiled. It wasn't until 3 days before his death that my grandfather personally set up the altar in his room and called me in, telling me that 3 days later, I must light the Mingzhu once a week, offering 3 sticks of incense, and not break the ritual. I had to keep doing this until a year later, when the Mingzhu extinguished and the incense fully burned out. He also told me that he was going back to the old house at Chessboard Well and instructed me to take care of the massage parlor. 3 days after he returned to his hometown, I received news that he had fallen ill, and he passed away in the old house. Hearing the news was like being struck by lightning. Since childhood, I had never known my parents, it was my grandfather who raised me. The bond between us was incredibly strong, and I couldn't believe that just 3 days after parting, he had passed away. I hurried back to the old house in Chessboard Well, deep in the mountains, where the villagers helped me take care of my grandfather's funeral. I personally saw him placed in the coffin and buried. Now, that man in black says my grandfather isn't dead. How could I possibly believe that? After hearing me out, Alex Wu said, "Your grandfather was a bone diviner." Yes, he also knew how to divine with Mokwi cock. Other than that, I don't think he knew anything about tomb raiding. But based on what the man in black said yesterday, it seems like my grandfather was hiding something from me. Alex Wu nodded, "That's right. Although I don't know much about bone divining, I have heard many stories about bone diviners. It's said that there was a family where the male head of the household started having strange dreams. Every day, he dreamt of his dead father, dressed in an animal hide, dismantling his own bones in front of him. Each day, the father removed just one bone, sometimes it was a leg bone, sometimes a skull, always dripping with blood. The strangest part was that when the man woke up, the exact bone his father had removed in the dream would appear at the foot of his bed. After 5 days, there were 5 bones piled up in the house, and the man was so terrified that he couldn't sleep, sitting awake until dawn. Listening to this, I felt a chill run down my spine, it was indeed terrifying. Then, one day, a bone diviner happened to pass by, and the man invited him into the house. The bone diviner merely touched the bones and told the man that his younger brother's grave had been dug up. If he didn't investigate quickly, a bigger calamity would follow. The man hurried to the ancestral tomb and found that the grave had indeed been disturbed, with the burial treasure stolen and the father's bones scattered everywhere. The bone diviner quickly gathered the bones and assembled them into the shape of a human, and somehow, the assembled skeleton wobbled its way back into the coffin. The diviner then said that the grave robber had lost their own virtue and would suffer retribution. Sure enough, a week later, a man in the village died suddenly. It was later discovered that he had been strangled by his own bones. In his house, the stolen burial treasures were also found. I shook my head. In the end, it's just a legend, right? It might not be true. I still find it hard to believe that my grandfather could know such skills. Alex Wu looked at me and said, "Why don't I go with you to your grandfather's old house? I'd like to see for myself if your grandfather was truly a master of bone divination." I wasn't sure how to respond, and we both fell into silence. This kind of thing is hard to believe, no matter who you are. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew in from my grandfather's room. The wind came without warning, as if it had risen from the ground. It brushed across my arm, and instantly, I felt a sharp pain, piercing into my bones. I couldn't help but cry out. "What's wrong?" Alex Wu jumped in surprise and hurriedly asked. I trembled as I lifted my left arm. Alex Wu quickly removed the shura grass that was wrapped around my arm. Upon closer inspection, my arm looked worse than before. Alex Wu shook his head. "It seems that the shura grass can't save you anymore. The only way now is to find your grandfather. If he's not dead, he might still be able to save you. If he is dead, then..." Alex Wu didn't finish the sentence, but I understood the implication. If I couldn't find my grandfather, what would happen to me? Death, or amputation? No matter what, I had to return to Chessboard Well. Fortunately, having Alex Wu with me made me feel a bit more reassured. I contacted the driver from before, Con Tam, and asked him to drive us to Chessboard Well. Chessboard Well, as the name suggests, when viewed from above, resembles a giant chessboard. My grandfather's old house was located at a corner of that chessboard, in the village of Kim Family Village. Since my grandfather brought me to Miss Town, several years had passed without me returning to Kim Family Village. Together with Alex Wu, I followed the familiar road back to my grandfather's old house. Ever since he passed away, I hadn't returned, and I didn't know what condition the house was in now. When we arrived at the house in the western part of the village, the scene before me was heart-wrenching. The walls surrounding the house had partially collapsed, and the brass gate was rusted. I led Alex Wu over the fallen wall and into the yard. The yard was cluttered with items, seemingly untouched for a long time. I walked up to the door, which was covered in cobwebs. I brushed the cobwebs away with my hand, and a sense of sorrow welled up inside me. It seemed my grandfather had truly passed away, and no one had returned here since. "I knew you would come back." Suddenly, a raspy, elderly voice came from beyond the wall. I turned to see an old man with white hair and a face full of wrinkles. I recognized him as Simon Kim, the village head of Kim Family Village, who had a close relationship with my grandfather. "Hello, Mr. Kim." I quickly responded and walked over to him. "You're here to visit your grandfather's house?" Simon Kim squinted and asked. Thanks to his relationship with my grandfather, Mr. Kim had always treated me well, almost like his own grandson. "Yes, Mr. Kim," I replied. "Actually, someone said that my grandfather might not be dead, so I came back to check. Do you know anything about this?" I asked softly. Unexpectedly, the moment I finished speaking, Simon Kim's face changed dramatically. His cheerful expression quickly turned into one of shock. "Who told you that? What are you talking about? I personally buried your grandfather. How could he not be dead?" Simon Kim blurted out a string of questions, his voice full of agitation. I hadn't expected such a strong reaction from him, and I stood there, frozen. "Anyway, you've come to visit, so that's that. You should head back soon. It'll be dark, and there won't be any more cars," said Simon Kim, hunching over as he quickly left the old house. "Mr. Kim, Mr. Kim." I called after him twice, but he didn't respond. This situation was far too strange. Normally, Mr. Kim would invite me to his house for a meal, but this time, things were different. This situation was too strange. Normally, Mr. Kim would invite me to his house for a meal, but this time was different. William Liu, does Mr. Kim follow Buddhism? Alex Wu suddenly asked. Buddhism? I've lived in this village for over 10 years and never heard that he practices Buddhism, I responded, puzzled by Alex Wu's question. Does he have any altars for Buddha or other deities in his house? Alex Wu asked further. I shook my head. As far as I know about Mr. Kim, he doesn't have any religious altars. That's strange then. I smelled a faint scent of incense on him, like the kind used in Buddhist rituals. Maybe he's been around it recently. Alex Wu remarked. I waved it off. You're being too sensitive. Mr. Kim treats me like his own grandchild. If something was going on, he'd definitely tell me. I looked up at the sky, realizing it was already late. Let's just stay here in the old house for the night. Tomorrow morning, I'll go ask Mr. Kim directly. I said. Alex Wu saw my determination, so he didn't object. We tidied up the room briefly and decided to stay for the night. However, as the evening grew colder, the wound on my arm started acting up again. At first, it was just a dull pain, but as the night wore on and the temperature dropped, the pain became unbearable. I gritted my teeth, feeling like my arm was about to break. I had no choice but to get up. I remembered there was an old well in the village, and the water from that well was ice cold. When I was younger, I often used the well water to relieve pain. Thinking of that, I pushed the door open and stepped outside, intending to find the well. Alex Wu, worried about me, followed along. The village was eerily quiet at night, with every house already dark and the families inside fast asleep. As we approached the well, I suddenly noticed that one house ahead was still lit. Amidst the darkness of the village, the light from that house stood out starkly. Looking carefully, I realized it was Simon Kim's house. His home was sturdily built with brick walls. In front of the gate stood 2 old willow trees, and the old well was situated between them. I turned to Alex Wu and said, the house with the light on is Simon Kim's house. Alex Wu nodded and whispered, I told you there was something strange about him. If you don't believe me, let's go check it out. I had almost forgotten the pain in my arm and, together with Alex Wu, we quietly slipped into Simon Kim's yard. Through a crack in the window, I saw a figure pacing back and forth inside. I knew that Simon Kim's wife had passed away a long time ago, and his children were working far away, so he lived alone. In the dim light, I could see Simon Kim pacing around the room, seemingly deep in thought. Alex Wu and I crept closer to the window. The window wasn't locked, so I gently pushed it open a little and peeked inside. Simon Kim was still walking back and forth, not noticing us at all. After a moment, he suddenly stopped, and I felt my heart skip a beat, thinking he had discovered us. But instead of looking our way, he silently walked over to a cabinet, took out a stack of joss paper, and placed it in a small bowl to burn. The fire flared up instantly, and it was then that I noticed there was an ancestral tablet and a few ceramic jars on the altar in front of him. After burning the paper, Simon Kim casually glanced in our direction. In the flickering firelight, his face looked pale, and his expression was tense. I saw Simon Kim's face in the firelight, his complexion had turned pale, and his expression seemed tense. Both of us quickly pulled back our heads. Fortunately, Simon Kim was acting on instinct and didn't actually notice us. He continued to take out 3 incense sticks, lit them, and bowed 3 times before the ancestral tablet and the jars. Alex Wu looked at me, and I nodded, confirming that he had indeed caught the scent. The fragrance wafting from Simon Kim was that of incense. Just then, out of nowhere, a cold breeze blew in, causing one of the jars on the cabinet to suddenly shake violently, making urgent sounds as it collided with the cabinet. Seeing this, Simon Kim's expression changed dramatically, and he quickly reached out to grip the jar tightly, mumbling, "Don't mess around, Liu Que." I felt a sudden stir in my heart. Liu Que was the affectionate name my grandfather was called when he was young, and very few people in the village still referred to him by that name. Only Simon Kim, who grew up with him, would use this form of address. However, the jar continued to shake, even more violently. Finally, Simon Kim sighed and said, "All right, I'll take them over now." After saying this, he took a water kettle and poured water into the bowl that had the ashes from the paper he had burned, then lifted the bowl and drank it down in one go. After that, he gathered the tablet and jars, placed them into a bag, and slung it over his shoulder. He also took out something from the corner of the wall and stepped outside. Alex Wu and I quickly hid in a corner of the yard to continue observing. Simon Kim stepped into the yard, and I noticed that he was holding a white paper lantern. Seeing the lantern sent a shock through me. In our region, white paper lanterns are only hung at the door during funerals. Simon Kim carried the lantern ahead, and Alex Wu and I quietly followed behind. Tonight, the moonlight was not bright, so we didn't dare to get too close, relying instead on the dim light of the white lantern as our guide. Simon Kim was wearing a black robe, and from a distance, he seemed to blend into the darkness of the night. At a glance, he looked just like a flickering ghostly flame floating forward, which was truly eerie. I recognized the path Simon Kim was taking. It led to the mountain behind Kim Family Village. For the people of Kim Family Village, the mountain serves two purposes. Firstly, most of the deceased are buried on this mountain, so it is usually deserted, especially for children who are strictly forbidden from going there, treating it as a forbidden area. The second purpose of the back mountain is that after people die, most are buried there. Therefore, the back mountain is usually deserted, especially for children, who are strictly prohibited from going there, making it almost a forbidden area. Additionally, when something significant happens in Kim Family Village, rituals are often held at the back mountain, as there is a mountain god temple located there. People often say, "Rely on the mountain to eat from the mountain," and "Rely on the water to live by the water." The entire chessboard well is surrounded by mountains on three sides, so the people here have a special affection for the mountains. Of course, people also hold great respect for the mountain god, willingly offering sacrifices for both major and minor events. However, it was clear that what Simon Kim was doing had nothing to do with either of these two reasons. He was walking towards the back mountain with the lantern in hand. He moved slowly, muttering something under his breath, but we didn't dare get too close to hear. Gradually, we found ourselves following Simon Kim into the cemetery at the back of the mountain. This cemetery is the resting place of the ancestors of the Kim Family Village, and no one knows how long they have been buried there. The cemetery is lined with tombs, and even during the day, the cold winds blowing through can send shivers down your spine. Yet, here was Simon Kim, holding up a lantern, walking among the tombstones, and strangely, he wasn't just passing through, he was circling around the graves multiple times. Alex Wu, seeing this, quickly pulled me behind a tree to observe Simon Kim. I whispered, "Could it be that Grandpa Kim is lost in a ghost wall?" Alex Wu shook his head. "Doesn't seem like it." At this moment, Simon Kim's murmuring grew louder, and I could catch bits of what he was saying. "Oh, the souls of the Kim family, the road to the underworld is hard to walk, follow this guiding light." His tone rose and fell, almost like he was singing an unknown melody. As he sang, I saw a small whirlwind suddenly appear in the cemetery, swirling around in place. This scene left me stunned. Alex Wu whispered in my ear, "It looks like the old man Kim is calling souls." Calling souls? How does he know about that? I was surprised and continued to watch Simon Kim in confusion. We dared not let our guard down. My hands were already soaked with sweat, and I was covered in a cold sweat, shivering under the night wind. Simon Kim walked in circles around the cemetery twice before finally raising the lantern and moving through the graves, continuing onward. Alex Wu and I also quietly followed him into the cemetery. However, as soon as we stepped in, we noticed a thick fog that had suddenly rolled in. Fog in the mountains is commonplace, but this fog came in a bit too quickly. In a very short time, it enveloped the entire cemetery. Simon Kim vanished into the mist, and we had no choice but to step forward slowly. Occasionally, I heard ghostly wails echoing around us. The sound seemed to come from nearby but also felt distant, creating an eerie atmosphere. We advanced carefully, listening to the faint sounds in the mist. The ghostly wails heightened the already tense atmosphere of the cemetery. As the darkness deepened, I began to feel a chill creeping into my every breath. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through, stirring the thick fog, causing Alex Wu and me to pause for a moment. The fog grew denser, obscuring our view of what lay ahead. "We need to be more careful," Alex Wu whispered. I nodded, and we continued forward, but each step became heavier. A sense of unease swelled within me. I didn't know what Simon Kim was up to, but it was clear that something was very unusual.